He was the kind of man that cities whispered about. Clean hands, untraceable exits, no conscience left to exploit. They didn't just hire an assassin. They hired a ghost with aim, precision incarnate, a professional of the final chapter, someone who never missed. His presence was supposed to be the period at the end of your sentence. They wired him millions, not out of generosity, but desperation. Because you weren't just resisting anymore. You were rewriting their narratives. You were doing damage in silence, reconstructing power dynamics without touching them. They couldn't predict you, couldn't control you, so they opted for deletion. It felt easier, safer, until he saw you. He didn't walk in cocky. He didn't need to. A man like him has no doubt left to wrestle with. He studies, he stalks, he dismantles. But the moment he stepped into your orbit, his certainty began to bend. There was no target, not in the way he'd trained for. You weren't pacing. You weren't on edge. You didn't reach for control. You didn't even look at him like an enemy. That was the first blow, your complete absence of panic, no fear, no posture, just presence, still grounded, almost amused. He felt his usual process unravel. This wasn't a mission. This was a reckoning, and he had no map for it. What unnerved him wasn't your strength. It was your lack of performance. You didn't try to prove anything. You didn't speak to explain your existence. You weren't defending, hiding, or asserting. You just were. Fully. Without apology or need. That energy, calm, contained, cold like ancient muscle, it shook him. He was used to targets who begged or fought, or folded. But you made no move at all. And in doing so, you stripped him of his momentum. He wasn't in control. He was being observed. And for the first time in his calculated life, he felt human again. Vulnerable. Small, like prey in front of a mirror that didn't blink. He tried to reframe the scene. Tested your psychology with subtle shifts. Stepped left. Glanced away. Shifted tone. No response. You weren't just unreadable. You were uninterested. You had no script to defend. No performance to give. And when someone with nothing to prove looks into your soul, it becomes unbearable. Because there's nothing to deflect off of. No ego to trigger. No arrogance to manipulate. Only space. And space eats cowards whole. That's what you were offering him. An infinite mirror. No walls. No noise. Just reflection. And reflection, for a man who lives in shadows, is the real bullet. So he backed away. Not out of mercy, but disbelief. He couldn't complete the job because there was no target left to destroy. You were past death. Past validation. Past vengeance. You had outgrown the dimensions they taught him to kill within. You weren't avoiding death. You had already embraced it. That's why he laughed. Not because you were funny, but because the joke was on him. He realized too late you weren't the one being hunted. You were the lesson. And like all profound truths, you couldn't be grasped. You could only be witnessed. That realization fractured him. The same way truth shatters delusion. He ran because staying would have meant facing himself. That's what people like him are never trained to do. They can end lives, topple dynasties, vanish without trace, but they cannot sit still in front of someone who has mastered their own suffering. You had turned pain into a monastery, loss into scripture, failure into design. You didn't hide the darkness. You architected with it. You carved silence into strategy, disappointment into detachment. You weren't immune to pain. You were fluent in it. So fluent that it couldn't be used against you anymore. That scared him more than your strength. Your neutrality. Your stillness. It haunted him. They waited for confirmation. A message. A signal. Anything. But all they got was silence. A silence that screamed. A void they couldn't decode. And then the whispers began. That he walked away. That he laughed. That he disappeared. And suddenly, you weren't just alive. You were myth. You became the variable they didn't account for. The equation they couldn't solve. And in that moment, you won a war without raising a weapon. Because the most lethal move is making a killer question his purpose. Not killing him. Letting him live with the question. They scrambled to spin it. To save face. But the story had already left their hands. People talk. Rumors mutate. And your legend evolved into something they could never control. Not because you crafted it, but because you didn't need to. Power that needs no witness becomes folklore, and folklore travels faster than reputation. You didn't post a victory. You didn't scream revenge. You just existed, and they began to shrink in your shadow. Not from action, but from implication. From knowing that they had sent their best, and he couldn't even enter your mind without losing his own. You became untouchable not by force, but by frequency. You no longer existed in the realm of competition. You had ascended, grown past the metrics they measured threats by. Their system didn't register men like you, because men like you aren't built to be seen. You are built to be felt. And feeling is far more terrifying than witnessing. They can deny what they see, but not what they feel. And now, even in their highest rooms, with their wealth and their hierarchy, they speak softer when your name echoes in the hallway. That's legacy, earned in silence, crowned by fear. They paid millions to erase you, but instead, they sponsored a ghost story. One that will be told in backrooms and boardrooms, in whispers and warnings. Not because you survived, but because you didn't flinch. Because you stared down death like it owed you a favor. Because you made the devil's favorite tool question himself. That's the move they never imagined. And that's the kind of power they'll never recover from.